This is a really fun discourse that has erupted that I've watched absolutely rip the right apart. Where do we oppose cancel culture at all times or not? Especially whenever it comes to college students. Krystal, I thought you and I had a fun discussion about this. People can go watch it. It was posted on our channel on Friday. And a war has broken out by two conservative commentators. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. First was from Megyn Kelly. She was actually responding to something from Vivek Ramaswamy, which we'll show you. But she effectively is saying, quote, that it is unable to persuade college students that, quote, murdering babies is wrong. There's no persuading them. We don't hire those who do the killing, and we don't hire those who applaud killers while the savagery is underway. If you are open to hiring one of those lunatics, though, good to know. This actually was responded to by Candace Owens. So let's put this up there on the screen. This is an important corollary to her discourse. She says, "Oh, stop it. This is incredibly disingenuous, Megyn. You know that many of those students are not out there because they want babies to be murdered. College kids are stupid. I used to be radically pro-choice. I'm glad I didn't get put on a conservative blacklist for wanting babies murdered. As it turned out, I was just young and temporarily brainwashed from a public school education, coupled with mainstream Hollywood lies, and not because I legitimately wanted to see infants torn from their mother's wombs. Dr. Thomas Sowell used to be a radical socialist who ardently supported communism. Thankfully, he wasn't put on a conservative blacklist, and he was accused of being a person who wanted worldwide suffering and starvation, as socialism and communism bring. Students are young and experimenting. You're an adult woman who is advocating for their lives to be permanently pigeonholed because they have the wrong ideas, which they are likely being spoon-fed in the classroom." And, you know, I gotta say, I actually thought it was a important kind of addendum to all of the discourse around this, because I have watched people who, I think correctly, have decried all of these efforts in the past absolutely sign on to this one. Now, I did, you know, I made a comment previously about like trying to distinguish between undergrad and law student, but especially with the undergrads, which I think Megyn is encompassing within that. I just, you know, absolutely oppose like anybody undergraduate who's involved in this. As Candace said, people do and say a lot of stupid things, you know, when they are young. That doesn't mean they don't deserve to be employed, you know, later on and follow this for them for the rest of their life. And as Candace correctly says, people change their minds all the time. In fact, this will probably be a learning thing. They're like, hey, I probably shouldn't just, you know, co-sign whatever somebody puts in front of me for quote unquote solidarity purposes. I should think for myself. That can be a good lesson without having to then endure permanent, you know, professional blacklist, Krystal.
Yeah, from some of the most powerful people in the country, CEOs, billionaires, conservative commentators, et cetera.
Definitely.
Just so everybody's clear what we're talking about here, can you guys put D7 up on the screen? The part of this Harvard statement, because the way Megyn characterizes it, it sounds like they were like, we want babies to be murdered. The part that people objected to from the Harvard student statement, which is there under the Instagram label there on the right, they say, we, the undersigned student organization, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. As I said before, to me, that's insane. Like, I am perfectly comfortable criticizing the Israelis as I do their government, the apartheid regime, the blockade, the war crimes. You can do all of that and also say, you know what? The terrorists in Hamas who massacred Israeli innocent civilians at a music festival are also to blame. They do share blame for the unfolding violence. Okay, so that's my issue, but that's what they said. They hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. Look at this tear sheet in the New York Times on the other side from opinion columnist Bret Stephens. Hamas bears the blame for every death in this war. It's the exact same logic. What, the Israeli government, which is decided to conduct this complete siege and deny all of the innocent civilians within Gaza water, electricity, food, force 1 million of them to evacuate in a humanitarian crisis, bomb civilian infrastructure. They don't bear any blame for that. They have no culpability. So that's allowed to be published in the New York Times with zero controversy, response, no problem whatsoever. Harvard student groups use the very same completely flawed logic. And there is an absolute vendetta out for these young people's heads of, we want you doxxed, we want you blacklisted, we're funding a truck to put your faces on it and say you're anti-Semites to drive around the town. We want you named and shamed and to be drummed out of polite society forever. However you feel about this conflict, we need to have some space for grace and learning and evolution and growth in this country. And that is why I've always been opposed to this sort of approach, whether it's an issue I happen to have more sympathy for or if it's one I vehemently oppose, because this is a nightmarish direction to go in.
Yeah, and let's give credit where due. All of this was sparked by Vivek Ramaswamy, presidential candidate. Let's put this up there on the screen. He put out this statement, quote, "The Harvard students who co-signed the anti-Israel letter are simple fools, but it is not productive for companies to blacklist kids for being members of student groups that make dumb political statements on campus. Colleges are spaces for students to experiment with ideas, and sometimes kids join clubs that endorse boneheadedly wrong ideas. I have been as vocal as anyone in criticizing left-wing cancel culture, but it is bad no matter who practices it. It wasn't great when people were wearing Trump hats were fired from work, and it wasn't great when college graduates couldn't get hired unless they signed oppressive DEI pledges. It's not great now if companies refuse to hire kids who are part of student groups that once adopted the wrong views on Israel. This is not a legal point, it's a cultural point. I say this as someone who vehemently disagrees with those student groups. Those calling for blacklisting students right now are responding from a place of understandable hurt, but I am confident that in the fullness of time, they will agree with me on the wisdom of avoiding these cancel culture tactics." And this also, as I said, is splintering much of the institutional right. Here's a good example here that we can put on the screen. Ben Dominic, the husband of Megyn McCain and a prominent conservative commentator here in Washington, he says, quote, "If Charlie Kirk remains the head of TPUSA, the right has an anti-Semite problem that will follow them into coming elections." The real beef by Ben was Charlie bringing up Israeli intelligence failures and saying that he didn't want to wait until later and wanted to dwell on it right now. Charlie, for example, is having to fight back against this. Let's put this up there on the screen. He put out this long tweet statement. "For the last 4 years, I've been accused of being a Jewish shill. We sponsor 300 people a year to visit Israel, etc. We kicked out a Jew hater at an event. We have successfully thwarted BDS campaigns. This type of libel is poison. You know nothing of what you speak except a 2-minute clip where I ask questions about the intelligence failures of the Israeli government, which were reported by Axios and others. If stuff like this continues, Israel will lose support from a major faction of voices on the right. Support Israel and you get called a Jew hater. This is a repugnant lie from the pit of hell. You should be ashamed." I think it just demonstrates once again the level of vitriol, on the issue, and already seeing a splinter, not only, much of the left, but also on the right, in terms of trying to prove your bona fides about who is more pro-Israel or not. None of this ends up standing in the long run. In the long run, none of this ends up looking particularly good. So I did appreciate the comments by Candace and by Vivek. And also, I do think it tracks to a foreign policy commitment. We didn't end up putting this into the show, but there was a big, divide between, Ben Shapiro and Candace on this. Candace is like, I think America should only care about our borders and not get involved in the rest of the world. Whereas Shapiro eviscerated, Tucker Carlson for effectively saying the same thing. He's like, well, we should care more about our border than we do about other countries. It's a very common sentiment, I think. And that itself will also further split apart the right should war come on the table. Because the main criticism right now of Biden, if anything, from the institutional right, is that he's not pro-Israel enough and not willing enough to bomb Iran or get involved in a conflict. So this is the same ideological fissure, I think, that exists on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see that there are a few people who are trying to remain consistent with some sort of principle, because it's rare that you see that. Oftentimes people, when it's their side that's being canceled, they care a lot. When it's something they disagree with, suddenly they're really silent. And this issue in particular on Israel, this has always been like the main area of silence on the right when it comes to cancel culture, because this is a consistent thing that comes up, as I said, even when you're not in incredibly heightened moments. So, as much as there was and continues to be a lot of censorship around views on the Russia-Ukraine situation, certain things you're really not allowed to say, you'd be branded as the Putin puppet and a Kremlin pal, all of this sort of stuff. It really is magnified and amplified on this issue where there are so many deep personal connections and ties, and just a lot of very, very fraught and understandable, frankly, emotions here as well. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.